Nice. Hi, everyone, or the one person who is in immediately. Um, Welcome. We're going to give it a minute or two just for let attendees kind of come in and join. Really glad to have you guys here. We've got a really great panel. If you're joining us right now, go ahead and hop into the chat and let us know where you're coming from, kind of a little bit about your portfolio. Small kind of like piece, you are welcome to type questions into the chat. I will monitor it, but I won't promise that I'll answer them or ask the panel. But if I see a good one, I might bring it up. You're more than welcome to communicate with us or talk. We love a lively chat. Just keep in mind, I don't have an official Q&A part of this. So if we see something that's really relevant, I might pull it up. But otherwise, we might be able to answer those later. Really glad to have you guys all here. Pretty awesome. If you haven't seen one of our revenue management roundtables before, it's a great opportunity to bring professional revenue managers on and for them to talk about kind of what they're seeing in their portfolios so that you can hopefully, take some of that and apply it to your own data in your own perspective. Idea kind of came out of honestly hanging out with Bryant at conferences and just, talking or like hanging out with Henry and having people walk up and just listen and tell us. It was really great to just hear you guys talking about it. So figured we'd make it kind of an official thing. I'll give it like 2-3 minutes and then we'll get started with our intros. This is being recorded. So if you have to leave early, you'll be able to follow up and listen. If you heard something that's really valuable that you want to send to your team or your friends, we'll have this up tomorrow or maybe Monday or Tuesday, depending on how much I have to do. Hey, Mike, good to see you from Vail. Got a few people in Florida, always a good expectation. If you're joining us, let us know where you're coming from. Always love to hear kind of all the people that are all around. I expect we'll probably have quite a few summer-oriented folks here. Hey, Katie. Oracle, Arizona. Oh, hey, Randy. Good to see you. Hey, Mally. Thanks. Yeah, that painting Mally's mentioning is that's one of mine. I did it about a year ago for a show. All right. Let me mute my phone so this doesn't distract me. And why don't we hop in? And we'll kind of we'll get started with some intros here. If you don't know who I am, my name is John D. Relay. You can also call me JDR. That's what a lot of people at Wheelhouse call me. I'm the head of revenue management education at Wheelhouse. Been with the team about 4 years. And prior to that, I was the head of revenue management for an organization called Stay Alfred, which was a lease arbitrage organization doing primarily urban inventory. But I joined them at the very beginning of their company when they had about 80 units, and I led their revenue all the way through growing to about 3,000 units in 33 US cities until COVID hit. And, lease arbitrage was a bit of a liability when COVID happened. But been a long-time revenue manager, and now I get the opportunity to talk to great revenue managers and just talk revenue strategy and how to optimize revenue. It's a really great time. So pleasure to have you guys here. April, do you want to start us off with introductions?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you so much for everybody who has joined us today. So my name is April Martin, and I am a revenue manager at Vtrips. I manage a pretty big portfolio of properties. I have the Gulf Coast of Florida, which is St. Pete to Fort Myers. I also have the Atlantic side from Jacksonville down to Daytona, and then I also manage Pleasure Island and Topsail. So I enjoy doing this. This is something I kind of landed into after working in tech for a really long time. I've been in PMS and apps for a long time, but really the pricing has always been my genre and kind of the thing that makes all the things align together greatly. So I'm really excited to share some nuggets with you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, April. I'll go clockwise on my screen. Bryant, you want to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, hey, I'm Bryant Loy. We're based out of Gulf Shores in Orange Beach, Alabama. I work for Brett Robinson Vacation Rentals. We have about 1,800 condos, like 9 houses across the Gulf Shores and Orange Beach area. I've been with Brett Robinson. Actually, last week was my 7-year anniversary, so about 7 years. I was with Wyndham for about 3 years before that, so about 10 years in the industry. You know, we really, our big thing is we're kind of a big company. Obviously, it's kind of a three-pronged giant that we have. We have a real estate arm, we have a development arm, and then our rentals arm is the portion that our revenue management team primarily focuses on. But you know, we dig into this stuff and look pretty deep at you know, just not just the revenue management side, but how do we, you know, profit optimization, because realistically that's really what we're looking at when you start getting into this level of detail. So you know, nice to meet everybody, and happy to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Bryant. Henry, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, John. Thanks for everyone joining. My name is Henry Corell. I've been in the industry since 2018. I started on the property management side, and then about a year ago, I broke off and started doing revenue management full time for other property managers. And so our company, we manage about 1,200 listings in total between Hawaii and Norway. So we get all sorts of mix of asset types and see all sorts of different markets and different effects that you know, seasonality and everything has in those different markets. But it's been an interesting experience learning all these different areas, but it's been fun and it's always challenging. Every day is different, which I love, and it's very rewarding in that aspect too.
Awesome. Henry, what's your company called?
RevUp Rental.
Perfect. Thank you.
There we go.
And Luis, introduce yourself for us.
Yeah, first of all, JDR, thanks so much for having me here, and welcome to everyone joining. I'm the founder of BloomRev, and yeah, we do something very similar to Henry, and yeah, we manage about 500 listings, very diverse across North America, Central America, and the Caribbean as well. So yeah, hopefully, you know, we can bring in some value here today of what we're seeing as well.
Awesome. So really great panel of very experienced revenue managers. Definitely a focus on kind of these summer markets around the Southeast on this panel, which I think is pretty good timing, being that we're, you know, kind of wrapping up the summer and can kind of see how things are going. I'll set the stage just a little bit. What we're going to talk about primarily is just what's kind of happened in the recent past, how the what trends revenue managers have been seeing and what they've been doing. What's kind of happening now? What are they implementing? What are they doing? What are they seeing? And what do they kind of expect for the future? Just to kind of set that stage a little bit, I've been doing a lot of looking at market data with different regions and different teams. And, you know, my kind of general perspective of what's been going on is end of 2024, things were looking pretty solid, right? If you were at DARM last year or VRMA, key data presentations where pacing was looking really strong. There may be a few signals that things weren't like all rosy because those ADR, they were pacing well at lower ADRs. As we get into January tended to start off pretty good, but as soon as we get into February and March, we start to see a lot of pressure on the markets pretty much across the country. I would say people really panicked around that time, like the sentiment of property managers and revenue managers was really bleak as that pressure kind of happened. But as we got further into the spring, that equalized. People, I think, became more accepting of what's going on, started to understand, and then that kind of leaves us into summer, right? So let's go around and see, like, in your guys' portfolios, what were you seeing recently? What kind of things did you implement? What was your kind of like strategy or tactics as you got through late spring and into early summer? And let's start with you, Bryant.
Yeah, so you know, spring stunk for the Gulf Shores Orange Beach market. So we came off a pretty soft March and April, and in the later part of spring, kind of early May and stuff, we got a little boost from a little festival that switched over and kind of became more market centric. Like we're a country music market, and so when that came up here, it really kind of pushed us in. And if you believe in momentum, we started to feel some of that momentum, and we started to see things look really strong for early June. Going into early June, we're up 3-4% in occupancy across the month. You know, July 2-3% occupancy, and when we were looking at our forecasts in early May, you know, we're projecting potential really strong growth across both June and July. Now I will tell you, about 30 days out from June, we saw a big slowdown, and so we saw that the first 2 weeks of June in particular really slowed down for us. So we had to start making some changes and adjustments like, hey, we're going to drop some of these 7-night minimums on some of our larger properties. We're going to make sure that we have, you know, really good weekday rates because weekdays didn't have quite as much demand this year as we've seen in some of these past years. And so, you know, those kinds of adjustments made a little bit of a move for us, but then we had to start looking at, okay, what's our total price comparison as we look to the market as well. And so we started to look at, okay, do we need to make an adjustment on fees in addition to what we're doing on the rate side and the state control side and things like that. And that's really what took us into really having a really strong second half of June. We've had a really good July. We'll have a great occupancy overall for the month. Again, with a company like us, when we get up around 90% in occupancy for a month, that's a whole bunch of nights sold. So that's kind of what we saw is a little slowdown. Kind of had to make a few little adjustments here to get things kind of corrected and back on track. And our fall right now looks fantastic, but we're trying not to get too carried away with it because it's a great way to stop momentum and have to start backtracking again if we do. So.
Yeah. What do you think what did your team think was causing, or in hindsight, caused that slowdown at the beginning of May?
It's tricky because what's interesting is when we looked at like the search data, because we take a look and see like, hey, how does our demand look as we're leading to certain arrival dates and things like that. We didn't see a slowdown in those couple weeks ahead of the 30-day kind of window, but our deposit policy is 30 days. So it went from, hey, somebody's paying a deposit of $200 or $150 or whatever that number is to pay in full when you're looking at, $1,700, $1,800, $2,400, $3,000. That's a big change for people. And so I think we didn't make an adjustment to the deposit policy. But it did lead us to kind of evaluate and say, okay, as we get our 2026 planning going up, is that something we need to evaluate for some of these off-season dates? Do we need to look at, having a dynamic policy? And if it's a dynamic policy, is it dynamic to where, everybody who books further than 30 days out pays, at the 30-day, but once you get in 30 days, you go into a 14 or a 7-day window. And so we've kind of started that process, but it's going to take a little bit before we figure out what we really want to do there. But it's definitely a part of the process is figuring out, okay, that seems to be the catalyst here because we didn't see any slowdown in search activity. We didn't see any slowdown in we didn't go jack our rates up by 20% at 30 days out or anything like that. So that felt like the one thing that was probably most impactful to that slowdown was just going from paying $150 to paying $3,000 like that.
Yeah, I really like that's I think really valuable. One, because I like the perspective that you guys in an environment under pressure are not just thinking about price, you're thinking about like what is the consumer experiencing here and getting to some, novel takeaways. The takeaway wasn't just like drop the price 20%. It's like, well, what else is going on here that could be causing these changes in our trend? Really awesome. Luis, do you want to talk to us a little bit about what you've been seeing kind of late spring, early summer and how you reacted to it?
For sure. Yeah, I can start off just talking about the Panhandle. Really, like that's one of our main markets. And I think at the beginning, it's very similar to what Brian said, right? In May, we're looking at, June was looking fantastic. We had, very strong occupancy numbers. But what we realized was that, that started to slow down very quickly. And we had to really not like you said earlier, not only look at our pricing levers, just holistically look at all of our booking levers and see, what is our comp set doing? What are they doing that, right now we are definitely not able to, get the bookings that we need to get to our, targets. We have very specific targets on every single, listing that we're managing and making sure that we get to those targets. So yeah, we started to look at, dropping length of stay rules, making sure that we were competitive within that comp set as well. So that definitely started to deliver some results there. But yeah, we definitely ended up, close to, I'd say 80 to 85% occupancy in June. So definitely was a good month, and July is looking very strong as well in the Panhandle for sure.
Awesome. One question I want to follow up on is you mentioned you're developing targets for your properties. I think that's always something really interesting to people because one, it's really hard. A lot of people don't really do it because they don't have the resources. But so maybe just digging into a little like, how are you actually developing those targets? What KPIs are the targets both based off of and tracked against? And just how do you incorporate that in your weekly process?
Great question. Yeah, that's something that's really important in our process. We try to really be as accurate as possible, understanding where the listing falls within its market segment, right? And then we look at the previous 12 months, what has that market segment done, right, for that type of listing? And then we're looking at booking windows, daily booking windows, and understanding how much should we have sold up to, say July 24th today for July, all of July, right? And then we're just understanding the target there for sure.
Awesome.
Really quick, just jumping in, Bryant, Luis,
Yeah.
is summer your guys' peak seasons?
Yeah. Yeah. For us, it's
Yeah.
all about June and July. It's really Memorial Day through August 10th for us is the big money period.
Is interesting.
Is it
Okay.
still August 10th, Brian?
Well, if everyone goes back to school on August 7th, it actually becomes about the end of July at this point. But that is actually something, and that's a whole other concept.
Yeah, for
So, yeah, no, probably not. It probably is really the last week of July at this point for us, based on what we're seeing this year because of back to school schedules.
Yeah. April, do you want to talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing in your portfolio?
Yeah, so it's been kind of an interesting trend for us here specifically. And I think one of the reasons that we are succeeding so well is because we're really hyper focused on local trends. So when I say that I manage properties in Florida, I can't put those together in the same bucket anymore and say, okay, this is the Florida standard. Or this is the Carolina standard. I really have to look at every location very intricately and make sure that the ideas that I put into place make sense for what is happening. And to give you some examples, I have a lot of HOA restrictions on the Gulf side of Florida. And so I really have to pay attention to that. And that's something that, if I don't sell that early enough, I'm probably not going to make that deficit up. Atlantic is a little bit different. People just want to go for the weekend. And so if I can break up a 7-night, week and actually get in a 3-night booking, great, fantastic. Carolinas is very similar to that. Primarily in the Carolinas, we have a 7-night booking and it's Saturday to Saturday or Sunday to Sunday. But those owners that actually allow us to give a little bit and give us that, I think it's just the leverage of being able to say, hey, I'll drop down to 3 nights within, 30 days. I'm willing to go down to 4 nights within 45 days. And we leverage those tools within Wheelhouse so that we're able to do that automatically. When you're dealing with thousands of units, you can't do that on a microscopic level. And so being able to leverage some of that AI technology is really, really helpful.
Awesome. I think it's a pretty unique perspective to be managing properties across a lot of markets in Florida. One of the things I want to just kind of ask you is, are you seeing kind of on the extremes? Are some markets really underperforming this year, and why do you think that is the case? And then on the other side, generally speaking, people think that this is a pretty tough year. Do you have some like kind of markets that are really overperforming, and what do you think is causing that?
So I hate to jump ahead, but I will tell you that part of my strategy this year when I came in was really focusing not so much on this year. Yes, I have to get everything parameter wise ready for this year, but I actually started looking at 2026 back in March. And what that was able to let me do is I'm now well ahead of the market in a lot of different places. Not all my markets, but a lot of them. I'm well ahead for my snowbird season. I'm well ahead for 2026 in summer in the Carolinas. And that's because I put that forefront at the very beginning of the year to say, hey, this is my plan. This is where I want to be. And let's make sure that we get there. We also work as a team in Vtrips, and that's great because it's kind of like having this mind genius that you can go back to and say, hey, have you ever done this before? What do you think about this strategy? And it's very much a collective. It's not just about the pricing. And I know that there are a lot of articles about this online, but it's also about making sure that marketing is in line with us. Are the promos correct? Does the property present well enough? And I think that part of my consulting background really allows me to be able to find those niches and say, hey, can we maybe change this description or move these photos around a little bit differently? I do kind of a little bit more, I think, than most revenue managers in that sense, because I really do take a holistic view of it and look at all of those things.
Yeah, that actually aligns with something. So I've been doing kind of like revenue management roundtables at a regional level. So keep an eye out if you're in a region. We've been doing these with local property managers. But one of the trends I've seen, not in every market, but most markets, is that one, a lot of markets are under some kind of occupancy pressure. Two, average rates tend to be a little higher still. Like the way people are advertising rates are higher. Um, Especially outside of like 30 or 60 days. They really start to stack up. So people are still holding premiums further out. When you look at the top performing listings, not only are they taking a significantly higher market share of occupancy, but they're probably, those premiums don't start until like 3 or 4 months out. So they're looking out twice as far. And I think something that's pretty consistent among professional revenue managers is is just how far they're able to look out, how much further they're planning for and making adjustments and in a way making smaller adjustments earlier. And I think that's kind of a consistent trend in almost every market I look at. Now, what you do see differences is some markets are much more sophisticated, so everyone's looking further out, but still what tends to happen is the top performing listings are looking twice as far out is the market average. Henry, why don't we go to you? What are you seeing in some of your markets? What are some of the things you've been implementing or anything that sticks out as pretty novel that you've been doing?
Yeah, really quick, just bouncing off April, it is so telling the snowbirds, the return bookers, like in a market we're in Florida, seeing like us versus the market, looking at the market, the year over year, how low it's been is shocking, and also signs, kind of like to kind of nice segue into the higher quality units. Our higher quality units are getting booked up, but we have to be really conservative with those lower quality units. But regarding this year, in my Florida market, the highest season is actually March. And so when we were going into spring, let's say it's 6 months in advance, the market with us, occupancy looked like it was pacing similarly year over year. Everyone's seeing like a little ADR bump. So why don't we push ADRs? But then around that 60-day mark for each month so far, we start to see a gap year over year, and it starts to grow. Even though there's last minute bookings, we're probably not going to, or the market, I should say, isn't going to hit that same number. So that's something that we saw, that middle of the ground booker wasn't really coming. So going into summer, we were really occupancy focused and maybe a little bit on the conservative side with that, just seeing the writing on the wall and then all the other economic factors going on. But so June, we were like, okay, because that's another high season. We're like, okay, let's shoot for occupancy, the premium units. Let's try to capture ADRs where we can. And then when we learned from June, when we blew occupancy out of the water, ADRs were almost in line. For July, we were like, let's push ADRs. Like we're seeing a lot of last minute pickup. Let's push ADRs, and we're kind of keeping that same mindset going into the rest of the year. And we're starting to see it for fall too, where 2 months ago, we're like, oh, September and October are pacing in line, like it looks like it's going to be healthy. And now there's starting to be a little bit more and more of a gap. So getting ahead of it with those more like run of the mill, just your everyday like condo, you want to be a little bit more conservative on that end. But those premium units, you definitely want to capitalize where you can, because people are looking for those. They're very specific typically. And that type of guest isn't hit as economically as the other ones. And they're also more of a scarce product, more supply that comes on isn't going to be as unique as some of those higher end listings. So that's kind of what we've been seeing with the whole occupancy pacing, being a little bit more on the conservative side, but our occupancy numbers have been pretty killer. I don't mean to toot our own horn, but planning in that sense, shooting for occupancy to hit those revenue numbers. Don't try to capture all the ADRs. We communicate this with our clients and owners. And then also, with length of stay, trying to get a little bit more conservative for the fall if it's a shoulder season, just being like, hey, this is where it ended up the last 3 years. You can see a general trend and length of stay going down. I think if we get there now, it gives us a better chance of just having visibility. And then another thing I do is just go on Airbnb and search 4-night stay and then a 3-night stay and then watch how many units get pushed out. And then you're just like, look, you can get put into here. And then, the add-ons and everything, it's even amenities. We offer a lot of like, oh, hey, this listing doesn't allow pets. Same thing, go on Airbnb and hacks down by like 80%. And it's like, yeah, people looking for a house probably might be traveling with a pet. So it's like dissecting those, seeing what people are wanting, but a general whole, it's playing a little bit more of the conservative side, knowing that there will be somewhat of a occupancy gap and that you will have to play the game against the market.
Yeah, I really do like these kind of like novel. It reminds me of, revenue managing 10 years ago, the little like hacks that you use that like aren't like some fancy data system, but you're just like, okay, I'm going to search for these things in on Airbnb and see how many are actually available. I think that's kind of a good segue into talking about what are we doing now, right? What are, and you can, I'll throw a couple questions out there and I'll let you speak to them. One of them is like, what are some of those hacks that you're using when you're just trying to identify, what's going on that are maybe non-obvious that you would use to go and kind of give you an indicator of something that's happening? Another question that you could decide to answer here is, I think that short booking window is really important. A lot of us have talked about shorter booking windows. If you look at the market data, a lot of people are actually having to compete in that short booking window because they've maybe held premiums too high or the market's trailing a little bit. What are the markers for you to know when to raise rate or to lower rate in the short term? Like, how are you making that decision? How is that, risk tolerance kind of coming together? I think whatever you want to cover here, but like, what are you doing now? What is like the big themes for your revenue management team now? And Henry, why don't we start with you and then we'll kind of come back around.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to, checking Airbnb, but looking at comp sets as well. Like, we have a market in Denver. We have some really nice condos. And if you look last minute, what's available, we're typically the higher end product that's left available. And I've done some research on the back end about who books those last minute listings basically. And typically they like the higher end stuff. So you can typically push those up a little bit. But if you're going to hit a weekend where occupancy, the building's going to fill out, then that is kind of an indicator where you don't need a slam rate necessarily, but it is watching the comps. And I do that a lot. Like in Portland too, we have some condos and I just go on Airbnb and I'm like, oh, look at all these very fancy listings of ours and we're priced underneath cheaper listings. And I know there's going to be a few more bookings coming in. We don't need to slam our rates. We could even be exactly the same, if not a little bit higher. And I'm sure someone would rather pay for this than the other one. And then there's other situations where it depends on how the risk tolerance of who you're dealing with is. And then, just kind of shoot for occupancy because that is the driver of revenue. You don't want to be left vacant. So it is kind of playing a little bit of a game. You don't want to wait last minute, and risk everything, hoping you're going to get filled up 2 weeks out. Just with the current trends too of occupancy ending up being lower in a lot of these markets. By the end of it, it is like being a little bit more proactive. We're looking like 2 months out in some of our main markets. We've done some like regression analysis, just finding out seasonality with when the indicators kind of strike. But yeah, that's kind of been a game plan recently.
Awesome. Luis, you want to talk to us a little bit about what your team is doing now, what you're monitoring, that kind of thing?
Yeah, for sure. I think to take a quick step back, what Henry mentioned a little bit earlier, I think is extremely valuable for everyone watching. I think that bookings in the period for checking in that same period, say like in July, for checking in July, has definitely, it's either softened or what we're seeing is that there's a lot more, like you said, JDR earlier, there's a lot more people holding premiums longer, right? So then we're competing for that minimum remaining demand. So what ends up happening is that we're tracking, essentially that destruction of that, last minute demand, right? So just understanding that, seeing the trend monthly, right? And then trying to anticipate that. Like, how can we anticipate that going forward? We're not going to get those bookings coming in at the same speed that we saw them coming in last year. So could we, be proactive about it and let's put in, our adjustments now instead of waiting within 30 days, within 15 days when we're having to slam rates, right? So I think, bringing that up is extremely valuable. And number two is it's always leaning on market pickup. Market pickup for us is crucial as well. Just understanding where is the market active right now and are we active as well in that same period, right? So if we're not active in that period, then we're not doing something right. So definitely always, taking those 2 points and that's when we know when we definitely need to make some adjustments, right? So.
Yeah, I really like that idea of like, where is the market active and are we active there? What do you do? And then combining that with the anticipation. So this kind of leads into that follow-up. Like, what do you do if you think that the market itself is not optimized to the consumer? Like, how do you identify that? How do you explain that to your clients?
That's a good one. So I think it really comes down, obviously there's 30,000 foot view of the market, right? And then you have your comp set, and what you're comparing yourself against to, right? What you think that the consumer will see us against when they go on Airbnb, when they go on Vrbo, et cetera. But how do we explain that? Really, it's just one, leaning on the data and explaining the data to our clients and to property managers and to homeowners, and letting them know, like, hey, here's what's happened over the past 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. This is what we think is going to happen, and this is why we're thinking is happening, right? Because potentially, our comp set is holding rates too high too long, and then we're having to compete with everyone else for a diminishing demand. Our demand factors are kicking in. Those are diminishing very rapidly. So I'd rather us book farther out in advance, right? Secure those bookings, get ahead of that trend that we're definitely seeing this year. We've seen in years prior, right, that that booking window getting shorter and shorter and shorter. But now what's happening, again, just to double down on that theory, is that the bookings, we have a lot more competition in the last minute reservations. So definitely have to get ahead of that booking window for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Luis.
Yep.
Bryant, do you want to talk to us a little bit about what you and your team are looking at, and how like the current booking situation is going for you?
Yeah. So one thing we did when the spring kind of dissipated on us was we decided we were not going to allow that to happen for the fall. So we went ahead and dropped, typically it's just a 3-night minimum in the off season. We went ahead and took our weekdays down to 2 nights for most of our properties, went ahead and just said, hey, even if that's 10% of searches at this point, if you get 10% additional people looking at these properties across these time periods for 6 extra months, that's an additional extra few nights per unit that we're going to end up getting across that time period. So we went to kind of low rates right off the bat there. Kind of the types of things that we are looking at there when we're trying to kind of dig into whether or not we're performing or we're not performing. We don't typically sit ahead of the market in occupancy across, from the beginning. We traditionally will trail the market by some amount, and then once it's all said and done, be 10-15% up in RevPAR from what we see. So we don't necessarily want to get into that race to be the first one to sell out mode. We don't necessarily have to be there. Now, we don't want to always be trailing by 10%, 15% or something like that. So for us, sometimes our health indicator is, have we made gains on where we were versus the market at this point last year on these segments? So are we, if we were trailing by 10% last year and we didn't have a very good, second week in September, are we down 3% this year? So we've made some gains, and what's the market doing year over year versus what we're doing year over year? And kind of looking at that stuff is kind of our health indicators, because what we're at right now is we are better equipped than anybody in this market to sell within 15 days, within 30 days. And we know that, and we're okay with that. And so we kind of bleed into our strengths, and we end up with really strong occupancies. We end up with better RevPAR for our owners. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. In terms of what we're looking for to try to figure out the strengths, like we're going to obviously look at, fall break schedules. We're a very heavy fall drive market. It will drive market year round. We've added a few flights directly into our market here recently, so we're digging into see to where those markets have longer fall breaks. Is there something we can do to go attack those markets and try to get some more stuff? But in general, we're trying to understand, our fall is a last minute drive if it's a good weather weekend. That's what it is. And so what we're trying to do right now is say, okay, if that's going to be 80% of the fall, then the other 20% that actually has the demand, let's capitalize on that right now. We're seeing a lot of our market isn't touching that. They're not going in and adjusting their prices up. I don't know if they're not using pricing tools or what, but we're seeing that they're kind of flatlining the rates across some of the fall dates here. And that's fine. Go sell out, go be at 30% below us in rate. That's fine. We'll go ahead and take that revenue. We'll have the RevPAR, to prove that we had a really great fall break time period. And that's where we'll go with it once we end up with the final number. We have this conversation with our owners. We have this conversation with the owner of our company a lot. You want to be ahead at halftime, or you want to be ahead at the end of the game? Because that's kind of sometimes where you have to decide. If you want to be ahead at halftime, that's fine. Just understand you're probably going to lose the game. And we're trying to win the game, not the half. So
that makes a ton of sense. And you said a number of things there that I think are really valuable as takeaways. One of them you touched on, looking in advance, right? A thing that advanced revenue managers can do is look further out. If one thing I always promote to people is if you have a really limited time for revenue management, don't spend it all looking at the next 2 weeks. That's easy. Just cut the rate. Look at the next season, right? Or look at an extra 30 days out if you can, because that's where you can make smaller adjustments to optimize your pace. Another thing I think Brian mentioned that, and I'll put it in a little bit more conceptual terms, but we're talking a lot about pace, and I think people want to know, like, what is a good pace? It's all relative. The answer isn't to get like, we can't tell you what your pace should be. We can tell you be intentional about how your pace should relate to the market or last year, because that's your strategy, right? Brian's telling us like their strategy is they know that they can sell really well within a certain time period. So their goal isn't to pace ahead of the market until they get to that time period. It's something else. So just the goal is be intentional about your pace and use your own data to uncover what your trends are and then relate them to the market or relate them to the comp set. It's not necessarily that you need to follow the market. I mentioned that to Luis earlier. Sometimes the market's not very well optimized. You're trying to identify that and set a strategy. Awesome. April, do you want to talk to us about what you're kind of looking into and what you're doing right now?
Yeah, that's a great segue because that is a lot of what we are really looking at right now. We leverage a couple of different opportunities for us to see kind of where we have opportunity. I think I mentioned at the beginning in Carolinas, I only have 622 nights left to book for July. That's incredible, right? Like that's almost 91%, and that's with my owner blocks. So I'm doing a really good job there. But then we have to kind of look and dig into the data. Okay, what are people looking at? Part of being part of the Vtrips team is that I have a mass amount of data that I can pull. So I can look at what are people looking at on the website? What are people looking at in Verbo? You know, how does that all aggregate together in key data against enhanced benchmarking? We really look at all of that data and then we really comprise it together and say, okay, where are my levers that I can pull? We also leverage Power BI, which I don't know that a lot of people actually leverage just yet, but that is a great aggregate for you to pull your data in from multiple sources and then be able to see completely different trends that you may not be able to see. I am not a revenue manager by trade. I actually came into this through technology and being a trainer on certain products. But I have learned how to leverage those different tools to be able to see things that maybe other people can't really see. So I think for me, it's really making sure that I am making sure that I'm actually going to leverage those the right way and at the right time. Just like you said, JDR, I can't do this today and have it make a difference tomorrow. You know, and especially in the Carolinas where I have these huge properties, that's just not going to work. Could I do it in St. Pete or in Fort Myers? Yeah, I could probably. Even on the Atlantic side of Florida, I have streets where I don't have HOA restrictions in Norman Beach, but I have restrictions the street over. So it's all about understanding that hyper-focused localization to be able to leverage what you can pull when you can pull it.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Before we move on to the future, I want to kind of, I heard Henry mention it about like the difference between luxury. In my opinion, there's a lot of mixed signals in the market, right? Go back to March, everyone's panicking, it's going to be bad. Get to summer, things feel more stable. But when I look at market data, markets are still under pressure. When you talk to professionals, they tend to be doing all right. They tend to be pacing fine. So there's a lot of mixed signals in the markets right now. And that means your performance could be very different from your neighbor's performance. Or if you have an owner, their home's performance could be very different from their best friend's performance who's also in the market. What are some of the big factors that you think are driving these differences, either from like the way the revenue is being managed or just the properties itself? And what do you think some of the, just what do you think are driving some of those differences in these markets? And April, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think Vtrips does a really good job of mastering all of this in one big picture. We work with marketing teams, we talk with operations teams. There's a lot that goes into making sure that that right price is at the right person at the right time. And that also means that the listing has to look great. What do the reviews look like? How invested is the owner? Does he want ADR? Does he want occupancy? What are those drivers? And it all has to be a team collaborative in order to make sure that all of those things are in line for that particular client. I think it really is a team effort.
Awesome. Luis, what do you think?
I double down on that. Are you asking about the luxury segment and what, how it differs to like the, middle of the ground properties?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to go with that.
Yeah. The I think like what April just mentioned is great. Putting the property in front of the right client at the right time is exactly what you need to be doing, right? Like right now you have to, those luxury properties have a much longer booking window, right? We definitely want to have a more, long-term view on those luxury segment properties to understand, where is that segment right now in, at the end quarter 4 already of this year, even at the beginning of next year, some of those markets that are entering, a peak season in January, February, March as well, making sure that, your properties are priced correctly right now. You're not leaving money on the table, but also not leaving occupancy right now, making sure that you're, in line to, with the targets that I mentioned earlier, making sure that you're hitting those for sure.
Yeah. And what are you doing for the non-luxury stuff, the stuff that seems to be struggling in the marketplace?
Yeah, with those, it's just really understanding where, we have opportunity for in our levers to, to adjust and be more competitive. Were we a 50th percentile property last year? And, what we've seen is that our industry continues to get better and better and better every year, more professional, and folks are continuing to improve their homes, renovate their homes to continue to drive revenue every single year. And what ends up happening, if you have an owner who's not putting in that amount of effort into their home, potentially last year that was a 50th percentile property. This year we have to, look at it a little bit differently, right? And understand like, hey, we're not going to perform at that same level because our industry continues to push up, right? We have every single year it gets a lot more professional, revenue management, professional photography, which is obviously it's a long time coming, but all of these different aspects that have changed the segments, right? And we have to understand where we fall in the market and do we want to undercut that, push for occupancy, and that's what we've been doing for listings that fall in that segment, and then owners that are pushing for improvements, etc. We're definitely seeing results there, better than last year, same time last year, that kind of stuff in pacing. So
Yeah. Awesome. Henry, what do you think? What do you think is driving like these differences in performance between kind of property types, and what are you doing about it in your org?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's amenities, what they offer, flexibility, everything along those lines. Luis mentioned it. Photos are huge. I try to get this across as often as possible. At least once a year, people should update their photos. Camera quality gets better. People get more sophisticated with how they shoot the property, and it really helps. We've taken the same listing that's been stale, gotten new photos, and it takes off. And then we'll try to like, increase maybe like the sleep count, stuff like that. But within like, I mean, there is a vast difference between a super luxury property, like a 3-bedroom condo with its own jacuzzi, and then down the hall there's a 3-bedroom condo, but it just looks like run of the mill. So those ones, they definitely they're going to be getting their demand. The other ones that are more kind of like the rest of the group, you definitely want to make sure that you're taking advantage of every amenity that you can. The photos, I'm a big person with like, people are scrolling, they want to click on it, or they'll click on a listing, basically like, what is it, like 2.5 seconds, the attention span. So you want that first photo to be super eye-catching, making sure that that's all in line. You want to be looking professional. Flexibility, people have been really liking with cancellation policies along those facts. And then also promos, discounts. People love a sense of value. It's like the Nordstrom tactic out far into the future. It's like, oh, it's 20% off, but we raised the rates a little bit, but people actually feel more value if it's the same price. It's like a psychology, like 101. It's crazy. So playing little tricks like that, but then also with that segment too, you want to be a little bit more conservative. You don't want to be having, leaving money on the table. And then going back to the piece about pacing and communication and everything, it is like, I've been hearing it a lot too. Owners being like, hey, we're pacing behind, like what's going on? And it's actually like, oh, that the booking window is shortening. We just were more filled out in the calendar last year. And after doing some analysis for certain properties, it's like, I think we undersold last year. We actually have more potential to make more revenue this year. But when key stakeholders see it, of course, they're going to see the pace and they're going to like freak out. But it's not always the case where, things are always doom and gloom. It's like more last minute. It's like, look at the past couple months, it picks up right at the end. Our occupancy takes off, and yeah, everything's golden there. But yeah, no, different asset types. There's all sorts of them, and there's all sorts of different people buying them. You just gotta kind of get as granular as possible with that.
Yeah, I do think one of the things, and you mentioned the word that I was thinking, which is, it's like the difference between scarcity and value, right? If you have product types where there's scarcity, you can optimize on ADR. But if you have a product type that isn't special or doesn't have like a sense of scarcity, like put yourself in the consumer's shoes. If you have a lot of options, then value needs to be what you're considering. You actually need to price for value for the consumer. The consumer needs to understand that as a value, which unfortunately means sometimes you have to have a come to Jesus moment about your pricing, right? Like a lot of people don't want to price for value. That's not how we priced 2 or 3 years ago on some of this product. But the reality is, if the consumer has a lot of options, they're only going to pick you if it's a value, right? And that's where Henry mentioned it also, being a little more conservative, but really identifying like, is this a property where there's scarcity? If you're looking at it from the consumer standpoint, does it stick out as something where you're willing to pay more because you only have that option? Or is it something where you're like, well, hey, it's like, I can book any of these hotel rooms. Like I might as well just book the cheapest one. You know what I mean? Brian, what are you seeing in terms of your kind of like, your product types and how you're managing those differently and kind of your approach
Yeah, I
for your.
mean, we don't have what you would consider super luxury. We have very nice condos that do very well, and they'll do significantly better than the other ones in their kind of property type. The thing I would say about this is, segmenting those out and giving them a special tag, calling them Diamond Collection, calling them something else, and giving them something that says like, hey, these things are better than everything else is a good way to kind of make the owner feel happy and to kind of give a little extra, hey, maybe that's a better unit that I'm willing to spend another 10% on because it's part of the Diamond Collection, so it moves faster and it does this and it does that. And so that kind of thing, we do that on a regular basis. The other thing I would say that is definitely worth paying attention to with this whole idea of like scarcity and value, if you don't understand where your available nights are this year versus last year, you're behind. And so from our standpoint, like we know that our market's up 3 to 4% in available nights this year. So if you're not pricing to understand that there is a lot more of the average included in that 3 to 4% than there is that ultra luxury or that really high end, then you're going to be missing some nights. Really, is probably what's going to happen, because the ultra luxury, that stuff sells itself for the most part. And yes, you have to have it priced right. No, you can't just go say I'm going to mark it up 15% more on this year because they had a great year last year. It's not going to work that way. But segmenting it out, giving it that better rating, giving it a better little look on things. We've talked internally about, do we do, an upgrade package on some of those where we do a slightly different amenity package for those people where you leave different soaps, different things like that, because that rewards the owner for having that very high end unit that's really gotten the additional revenue. So, those are all the kind of things we look at when we kind of dig into it. I think just like what we've said the last 5 years, those higher end properties just don't see the dips year over year that everybody else does for the most part. The higher end properties kind of continue to kind of chug along because the top 3 to 5% of people who are willing to spend the money continue to be willing to spend the money year over year, and they know exactly what they want. They're going to book exactly what they want. They don't really care about spending an extra couple $100 because it doesn't really impact them.
Yeah, Brian, that brings
Oh, go ahead, Henry.
You mentioned that you have a bunch of similar asset types, something that we've done or that we're doing and something that you might be doing, but other people could probably benefit from is you mentioned like, the Diamond group. What we're doing is we're taking like all the units in the building, we're seeing the top performers in them, and then we're kind of seeing why. If they all are very similar, what's the difference? And like, I remember doing an analysis on a portfolio, and before even looking at any of the listings, I could probably point and be 90% correct and be like, oh, the first photo shows an ocean view with a pier. like, without like knowing anything else about the property. But it is interesting, just like taking that small group of really high performers, why are they high performing? It could be a multitude of reasons, other than amenities, but I just wanted to put that in. Sorry, April.
No, you're fine. No, and it's a great comment and a great topic to talk about. Bryant, we obviously we have thousands of units within Vtrips, but we do segment out our luxury properties as well, and those are given special attention to make sure that we're in line. It's very easy to do a portfolio in a condo unit hotel and say, okay, these are the rates. Yes, I'm going to give a $2 bump base rate for these ones on the corner, whatever you want to do. But when we're talking about luxury properties, that's a totally different subject. And you do have to be ahead of the market in a lot of cases to make sure that those properties get booked way ahead of that last minute booking market. And you do also have to know what is your booking window. If your booking window on those luxury properties is maybe 90 days, maybe we do something different. But for the most part, for me, it's like 240 days out or more for me to get those luxury properties booked. And so I need to make sure that my prices are right in line, well ahead of when anybody might even think about booking.
Yeah, that makes sense. We've got about 9 minutes left, so we'll go a little quicker on this one, but I know we mixed up in this session in particular, we talked a lot about past and future at the same time, but what is your expectation for how 2025 is gonna wrap up? Like, what is your team preparing for? What do you think is gonna happen? What do you think the key things that you're gonna be focusing on are? And let's start with you again, Brian, and we'll come back around.
Yeah, so we're getting ready to do a full plan session for 2026. It's something where our revenue management team sits down for a week and kind of locks off from the outside world and says, here's everything we see about next year. Here's everything that we need to learn from what we found in 2025 or even 2024 and 2025 to understand what mistakes we made, what things we got right, and kind of going into it. So I'll have a lot better answer for you in about 2 weeks. But as of right now, the plan is we think that it's going to be a very occupancy focused off season this year. We're gonna make sure we get nights here. We're gonna put heads in beds from now through the end of really through the end of March of next year probably. We're gonna get heads in beds. We're gonna try to get the nights here. We'll push where we can for some of these bigger weekends. You're gonna get Thanksgiving demand. You're gonna get New Year's demand. You're gonna get some stuff across weekends and football season where people want to come do a quick beach getaway. That's going to be something you're going to see, but we're going to go heads and beds for the rest of this year. We're going to plan on next year. We've seen a couple soft springs in a row, so we're going to try to be very careful with what we do as we set up spring 2026. We've seen a couple good summers in a row though, so we think that we're probably going to go not real aggressive. It's not like we're going to go out there and put a 30% premium or anything like that, but we're gonna make some adjustments on what we're doing weekday for next year for the summer. We're gonna make sure that we aren't super restrictive on the 7-night stuff and things like that. And if we don't have to be on certain units, and I would be surprised if we're more than 3 to 5% in either direction next year versus where we are this year. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, we're going to have a really good year in 2025. But that's kind of how we're approaching the year is, until something tells us otherwise, you should always kind of plan on it being pretty similar to what you saw in the prior year, because that's your most recent data set that you're looking at. So.
Yep, makes a ton of sense. April, what are you thinking about next year? And you mentioned already that you're looking pretty far out.
Yeah, we look pretty far out. But I'm also looking at the end of 2025, right? Like my year is not over yet. I still have a lot of segue to go. So I am looking for all those opportunities. I think the biggest thing that we're really looking at right now is occupancy. So those opportunities where I can drop minimum length of stay or I can drop in other restrictions. I'm really trying to leverage those for the owners. The other place, yes, obviously, I've been well ahead of 2026, and I'm really proud of that. I think that what we've been able to do and kind of building that momentum has been really helpful. But I'm not going to stop doing that as we move into Q4, because I know that there will be opportunity there. And so I want to make sure that I'm ready there. The other thing, which some owners and property managers maybe aren't thinking about, is I'm already looking at 2027. and figuring out like what are my rates going to be for my snowbirds? How can I optimize there? We're really looking way far ahead, and I know that that's not necessarily what everybody does, but for me, it has really worked out and really paid in dividends.
Awesome. Luis, what's your team looking
Yeah,
at?
for sure. We're definitely heading into a shoulder season in most of our markets in North America. And yeah, with that, we're building flexibility into our automations, right? In our pricing tools, just making sure that all of our booking levers are as flexible as we're permitted to be, right? Because we perform well in the shoulder season now. As we head into Q3, Q4, our SEO is going to be that much better into the booking window for peak season early next year. And then it's a flywheel, right? We push that flywheel. We continue to move really fast and appearing early on the search results when that peak season booking window rolls around, and then we'll start to really hit on those high ADRs that we want to hit in that time frame, instead of having to be reactive past that booking window. So definitely flexibility is the key word right now that I'm preaching to my clients here as we head into shoulder season, for sure, into 2025. And results based, a lot of the markets that we're in are seeing slight dip in RevPAR year over year. But most of our clients should be around 5 to 10% in RevPAR above 2024. So yeah, definitely happy about that. So looking to close out the year really strong, for sure.
Yeah, I really like that concept that you bring up, which is, some people I think are always trying to maximize ADR, but shoulder seasons are a great way to, if you're not too worried about maximizing ADR, you use it because it links to your high season, right?
For
Use
sure.
it to build momentum so that you can maximize in your highest demand time periods. And that's something I think you've probably heard from this group here is it's not always about maximizing ADR on every day. It's about maximizing ADR on the highest demand dates, but
Mhm.
finding when you can use other dates to drive occupancy or listing KPIs or other things so that you can do that. You're in a position to do that, right? Um, awesome. Henry, what are
Yeah.
you thinking for the rest of the year in 2025?
Yeah, no, I think we all have a very similar game plan, but yeah, no, listing longevity, it also helps with getting those bookings. Sometimes you have to communicate that as well, keeping the listing alive so that you can maximize on those ADRs. But for going into fall, let's say mostly it's shoulder season. I think that, yeah, we are all on the same page with kind of playing it more conservatively. I think I have a view of the factors that affected the summer per se in some markets to have lower occupancy are going to affect shoulder seasons more so. So I'm being a little bit more cautious there, a little bit more ahead there, just making sure that we're staying healthy. And then in 2026, I love the historical anchoring feature that Wheelhouse provides. We utilize that, but then we also offer returning guest discounts, far future discounts, and all that sort of thing. So that puts us in a pretty good position. It's some markets it's heavy where 12 months in advance you should see a healthy amount of bookings, but in a lot of cases those have been down, so you can play the game as well as you can with that aspect. And but also, yeah, no, just kind of just being aware. Yeah, you definitely want to, like April was saying, you want to keep your eyes out at least 12 months in the future, because just like the snowbirds, it's kind of like it's like writing on the wall of kind of what's going to be to come. Like, how should we switch it up? Okay, people are being more conservative. I've seen a lot of changes just in asking rates and availability in 2026 compared to 2025 than I have in any other 2 years before. It's kind of nuts. And like sometimes I'm like, do people know what they're doing? Do I know what I'm doing? Like, and then but people are maybe they're testing the waters. But no, it's definitely a cautious time, conservatively optimistic.
Yeah, I think that the last few revenue management roundtables from professional revenue managers, we've really heard be more conservative, look further out. That is the big takeaway, I think, because we are seeing a difference in performance. A lot of markets are down, but when you talk to professionals, they tend to be maintaining or doing a little better. And take advantage of what they're doing. Look a little further out, listen to them, watch their data, because they are looking further out, and they're not just being conservative all the time. What they're doing is they're identifying where there is going to be demand so that they can push rate, but then they're not just like holding it flat. And I think when you look at average market rates, you see that markets are still on average not really pricing effectively outside of, 60 days. And so if you can just even spend once a month to look an extra season out, that gives you a lot of ammunition to do things better. The other thing I think that is kind of worth paying attention to is I think whenever financial news is in the news cycle, you should have a plan B for changes to booking behavior. We saw that a lot during the spring. And I think that that contributed to some of the hiccups we've seen in pace, because at the end of the day, summer has turned out pretty decent for a lot of professional revenue managers. But those booking pace interruptions can cause a lot of problems, especially if you're not paying attention. I think you should have a plan B, because I expect that we may see that re-enter the news cycle as we get into August and September. Awesome, guys. We'll really appreciate all your time today. We will have this recording up, so if you wanted to catch any other tidbits, or if you wanted to share with anyone on your team or your friends, we'd love to have you share. And then we'll catch you in a couple months when we do the next one and kind of round out the fall and start talking about 2026 seriously. Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, guys.